Nolan Vex had two rules in life. Never trust a Ravenian battery past its expiration date, and never open the door after a meteor storm without pants on. The first rule had saved his life twice. The second one, however, had just failed spectacularly. He squinted through the cracked viewport, his eyes still adjusting from a midday nap that had somehow lasted 7 hours. Dust clouds coiled like lazy dragons across the moon's horizon, and something, definitely not a rock, was lying 50 meters from the outpost perimeter. It wasn't moving, which made it less threatening than usual. Still, he muttered a curse, yanked on the nearest pair of pants he could find, which turned out to be 2 sizes too small, and grabbed the old plasma rifle he used to threaten trespassers and rogue vending bots. Jeff, his toaster, chirped from the kitchen. Statistically unknown life forms found in post-storm craters are either royalty or parasites. You may kiss your knees goodbye. Appreciate the optimism, Nolan muttered, stepping out into the wind. The figure in the dust didn't twitch when he approached. Closer now, Nolan could see bits of tech fused into what looked like armor. Sleek, dark, and covered in scratches that told stories no sane person would want to hear. Her cloak flickered like bad reception, struggling to maintain its camo field, and when he knelt beside her, he noticed 2 very unhuman features. Ears too long to be decorative, and blood that shimmered like quicksilver. Right, he whispered. Alien royalty or radioactive cosplayer. Great. She stirred, barely. Eyes fluttered open, golden but sharp like someone who once had people executed for chewing loudly in court. She grabbed his wrist with surprising strength, then collapsed again, whispering something that sounded like an insult in an intergalactic dialect. Nolan, never one to leave dying strangers on his lawn, sighed and looked around. Well, he said, hoisting her over his shoulder, you picked the worst moon in the sector to crash on. Hope you like freeze-dried peas. It took him half an hour to carry her back to the outpost. The hover cart refused to start unless sung to in the voice of its original owner, and Nolan's opera training ended when puberty arrived. By the time he dropped her onto the workbench that doubled as a medical station, his back was a symphony of regret. She groaned and tried to sit up. He held her down gently. Stay still, he said. You've got a busted shoulder, a cracked rib, and the look of someone who's very used to being in charge. Don't worry, I'm a mechanic. We're basically doctors for machines. She opened one eye and muttered, This explains much. Flattered, he replied, disinfecting her wound. You got a name? Or should I keep calling you Crashy McStabface? She blinked at the ceiling and said nothing. Her breathing was shallow but steady. Nolan wrapped her arm, checked for internal damage with his scanner, which tried to self-destruct halfway through, and sighed. Whatever species she was, her biology was about as cooperative as a hungry Krell wolf. Jeff, he called, add mysterious alien woman to the guest registry. Should I prep a room or a coffin? Room, Nolan said, glancing at her. Pretty sure she'd kill us both if we went with the second one. Over the next few hours, the stranger drifted in and out of consciousness. Sometimes she mumbled names. Sometimes she cursed in languages Nolan was fairly sure hadn't been spoken aloud since the stars were young. At one point, she tried to strangle him with a power cord. By morning, she was sitting upright, draped in a patched-up thermal blanket, and staring at him like she was still deciding whether he should live. He offered her a bowl of synth broth. She sniffed it, sneered, and poured it into Jeff. Oh, good, Jeff chirped. More poison? Glad we're all friends now, Nolan said, leaning against the wall. You can stay until your ship, if there was a ship, comes back to get you, or until you stab me. Either way, I get some excitement out of it. She didn't answer. Her eyes tracked every movement in the room. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter, smoother, like silk over a blade. You should not have helped me. Nolan shrugged. Bad habit, working on it. She nodded slightly as if confirming a theory. They will come. Great. Should I make tea? That earned him the faintest twitch at the corner of her mouth. It wasn't a smile, not quite, but it was more than he'd expected. Then her expression hardened again. You don't know what I am. Let me guess, Nolan said, leaning in. Intergalactic spy? Runaway bride? Secret heir to the throne of some lost star kingdom? Her eyes flashed. He stopped joking. Oh, stars, you're serious. She didn't reply, which somehow made it worse. He stood up and started pacing. Okay, we can work with this. I mean, we have power, we have food. I've got a half-working stealth field and a whole drawer of very aggressive adhesive. This is fine. This is totally... Outside, the warning beacon began to hum. Low. Ominous. Nolan froze. The scan grid had activated. Something was in orbit. Close. Watching. He looked at her. They found me, she said quietly. He rubbed his face. Well, I guess this is what they call a plot twist. She stared at him. You could turn me in, he laughed. Lady, I once got kicked out of a job for trying to unionize vending machines. I'm not exactly a friend of galactic authority. Silence passed between them. Then she reached into the folds of her cloak and handed him a small crystalline chip. He examined it. It pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat trapped in amber. This holds the command codes for a fleet, she said. If I fall, they must not. You carry that in your shirt? Close to the heart. Safer than in a vault. Nolan tucked it into a hidden panel behind the workbench. All right, you can stay, but you owe me, and I want answers. Eventually. She nodded. Then, so quick he almost missed it, she tilted her head in gratitude. He tried to play it cool, but inside he was screaming. Not because she was royalty, not because they were being hunted, but because he'd finally met someone who understood the importance of hiding dangerous objects behind the coffee filters. By the time Kalara had fully healed, Nolan had accidentally poisoned her 3 times, offended her people's culinary traditions twice, and learned that royal alien armor did not like being washed with laundry detergent. In return, she had reprogrammed his toaster, rerouted the outpost power grid, and discovered that sarcasm was a native dialect on this part of the moon. It was a truce born of necessity, awkward breakfasts, and an overwhelming threat of annihilation just over the horizon. She had taken to sitting near the window in the evenings, staring at the stars like they were old friends who had betrayed her. Nolan tried not to ask too many questions. He'd already found out enough to make his skin crawl. Civil war, betrayal, assassination attempts, and something about a planetary siege involving gravity reversal tech in orbital vines. Whatever kingdom she'd come from, it hadn't gone down quietly. Jeff had been updated with a new language module and now refused to serve toast unless it came with a royal decree. I require an official seal, or at least a respectful bow, he declared when Nolan requested breakfast. Protocol is protocol. She really got into your circuits, huh? Nolan said, digging into a bowl of nutrient mush. She reintroduced dignity to this household, Jeff replied. Kalara entered the room like a gust of composed doom. Your food still smells like despair. Thank you, Nolan said. It's my signature flavor. She ignored that and scanned the holopad Nolan had been using to monitor the skies. Her eyes narrowed. There's a surge in comm traffic near the outer orbit. Unencrypted. He looked up. How can you tell? Because your equipment is ancient. It hums when it shouldn't. I thought that was just Jeff. Insult noted, said the toaster. Kalara adjusted the settings on the pad, fingers moving with mechanical precision. Nolan tried to follow along but gave up somewhere between quantum interlace and data resonance harmonics. Instead, he focused on looking helpful and not setting anything on fire. They're scanning for me, she said after a beat, but sloppily, impatiently. So they're not very good at their job? They're very good, she replied, eyes distant, which means they're getting desperate. Nolan leaned back, trying to pretend his spine wasn't itching with anxiety. Any chance they think you're dead? Like really dead? Not anymore, she said. I activated a failsafe during my escape. It would have erased my last known location, unless someone intercepted it. Well, that's very comforting. She looked at him with a raised brow. You're still here. You could leave. He snorted. Please. This outpost's the closest thing I have to a retirement plan. And let's be honest, if I turned you in, I'd be vaporized by whoever's not paying the bounty. You are a strange man. Been hearing that since I was 6. Later, while she was running diagnostics on the outpost's long-range transmitter, Nolan found her in the comm room, surrounded by scattered tools, exposed circuits, and a pile of components that looked suspiciously like parts of his emergency shower unit. Okay, he said. Gotta ask, why does Royal Communication Technology require my water heater? It doesn't, she said. Yours was just convenient. You owe me exactly 4 hot showers. You have 2 settings, freezing and molten plasma. You're not missing anything. She handed him a glowing disk. This is a signal core. It can ping an old ally of mine, but only if we send it from a secured relay, off-world. He rubbed the back of his neck. You're talking about stealing a ship. I'm talking about borrowing one. You know that's not how borrowing works, right? Her silence was both answer and challenge. Fine, he said, but I want a cape. If I'm going to help the Queen of the Galaxy, I deserve a dramatic cape. No? A little one? No. That night Nolan dreamed of capes and explosions. When he woke up, Kalara was gone. Panic set in fast. He ran outside barefoot, hair wild, heart pounding. The moon's dust stung his eyes, but there, near the edge of the crater, stood Kalara, staring up at the stars, her hand extended toward them like she could pull herself back into the sky. You okay? He asked. She didn't turn. They'll come here soon. I won't let them find you. You think I'd let you walk off just to save my hide? You should. Well, I don't have a great track record of making smart decisions. She turned at last. You'd really risk your life for someone you don't even know? You eat my food. You reprogram my toaster. You stole my shower parts. That's practically family. Something strange flickered in her expression. Confusion, amusement, maybe something warmer. She shook her head. If my people find me, some will try to help. Others will try to kill me. But none will recognize the woman I am now. Nolan looked up at the sky. Maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe it's your chance to start something new. She didn't respond right away. Then, you're naive. Not naive. Just tired of everyone being so miserable all the time. Back inside, Jeff played music Kalara had uploaded. A slow, haunting melody unlike anything Nolan had ever heard. It filled the room with weight and wonder. He asked her what it was. A battle hymn, she said. From when we still believed in peace. Well, that's depressing. She tilted her head. You'd prefer something with more rhythm? I'd prefer something with cowbells. Later, as they prepared a list of supplies for the upcoming ship heist, which Nolan insisted on calling Operation We're Totally Screwed, Kalara handed him a data slate. What's this? He asked. A blueprint. For the scepter. If we get it back, I can reclaim command of what's left of my fleet. He scrolled through it. Is this a plasma core inside a gravitational isolator? Yes. Cool. How likely is it to explode if I touch it? That depends on your mood at the time. Comforting. As the moon rotated toward night again, they sat side by side beneath the window. The stars glittered. Tension loomed. But for now, Nolan told her a story about how he once tried to bribe a customs bot with chewing gum. She laughed. Just once. He grinned. There it is. The Queen has a laugh. Don't get used to it. He nudged her shoulder. Too late. They watched the horizon together. Somewhere out there, enemies waited. But for a moment, there was peace. The hangar bay of Station 9. Theta smelled like old coolant, burnt coffee, and bad decisions. Nolan crouched behind a crate marked, Medical Slugs Do Not Shake, trying very hard not to sneeze. Kalara stood beside him, unbothered by the sharp tang of ozone in the air, or the approaching sound of armored boots clanging against steel. She had her hair tied back, her eyes gleaming with calculated purpose. The pistol in her hand was half human, half something, so advanced it shouldn't exist, and it purred softly as it powered up. Any chance these guys are just delivering cupcakes? Nolan whispered. They're in full battle armor. Chocolate cupcakes? Kalara gave him a look that could melt titanium. He grinned because if he stopped grinning, he might scream. The first squad passed the crates, scanning the bay with their visors. Kalara pressed a tiny device into Nolan's palm. This is the override key. Get to docking terminal 3B. Plug it into the control panel. He nodded. What happens then? I'll give you exactly 30 seconds. Then what? I improvise. That's never a comforting thing to hear from someone who once hot-wired a solar cannon to boil tea. Focus, Nolan. He sprinted low across the hangar, heart thudding louder than the alert sirens that hadn't gone off. Yet, Jeff had spoofed the station's security grid just long enough for them to slip in, but even the world's sassiest toaster couldn't hold off a full Royal Battalion for long. Nolan reached the panel, jammed in the override key, and prayed to every alien deity he'd never believed in. 30 seconds. He watched the countdown blink to life. Meanwhile, Kylara stepped from behind the crates, her silhouette framed by the station's flickering lights. "Commander Yelix," she called out, "how long have you been pretending your loyalty wasn't for sale?" The armored figure stopped. His visor retracted to reveal a scarred face and a sneer that had survived 5 campaigns and 2 betrayals. "Long enough to watch your entire court fall, your radiance." "I'm touched," she said, "but this court is still standing." Behind her, the station's lights surged. The docking clamps on the stolen cruiser disengaged. A soft hum rippled across the floor, and the cloaked vessel shimmered into visibility. Kalara smirked. "Also, I brought backup." A second later, the air was full of yelling, plasma bolts, and exactly 1 frying pan that Nolan had thrown out of panic. Jeff's voice crackled through the comm. "I regret to inform you that station policy prohibits armed combat in Docking Sector 3. Also, I've locked all exits. Good luck." The firefight was chaos. Kalara moved like wind wrapped in steel. Efficient, graceful, terrifying. Nolan, for his part, mostly ran in zigzags and screamed helpful things like, "Don't shoot me, I'm allergic to lasers." Still, they reached the cruiser. Just as the doors sealed shut, Nolan grabbed Kylara's arm and yanked her inside. "Remind me again," he gasped, "why you didn't just call your army?" "Because most of them defected," she said, breathless. "The rest are scattered or in hiding. I need to give them something to believe in again." Nolan collapsed into the pilot seat. "Well, you've got a toaster and a guy who once got banned from a casino for trying to bribe a slot machine with marshmallows. That's something." Kalara smiled. "It's more than I had when I fell." They launched from the hangar, dodging laser fire and a particularly angry shuttle that refused to yield. Jeff took over navigation with far too much glee. "Shields holding, life support stable, and for the record, I've named the ship Royal Toast." "Denied," Kalara said. "Appeal submitted," Jeff replied. They escaped into the void, pursued but not caught. Hours later, in deep space, they found an abandoned listening post nestled into a hollow asteroid. Kalara activated the core Nolan had risked his life for, slotting it into the control console. For a moment, nothing happened. Then lights flared, data streamed across the walls, and a dozen holobeacons pulsed in reply. "Allies," she whispered. "They heard it." Over the next days, the ship became a center of rebirth. Messages came flooding in. Fragmented fleets requesting orders. Old captains pledging their swords. Kalara stood taller, her voice firmer, her laugh returning in short, sharp bursts. Nolan watched her rally a scattered empire with words spoken in a language he didn't understand, but one that carried weight like gravity. Still, not everything was easy. Trust was fragile. Some of her people wanted vengeance. Others wanted peace. A few thought she should remain in exile. One night, while patching a coolant leak with duct tape in blind optimism, Nolan found Kalara staring out the viewport. "Thinking about going back?" he asked. "I must," she said. "Not for the throne, for the people who believed I wouldn't." "Do I have to call you Your Majesty now?" "You never have," she said. "And look where that got us." They laughed. It was easy now, like the universe had stretched just enough to let them breathe. Later, in orbit around her homeworld, Kalara broadcast a single message across every channel. Not a declaration of war, but a plea for unity. She offered amnesty to those who surrendered, clemency to traitors who aided in rebuilding, and punishment only for those who refused to stop the bloodshed. The battles were short. Some never even began. Her name spread faster than her forces. The queen who survived, the woman who came back, the one who returned not with fire but with forgiveness. She walked through her old palace like it was a stranger's home. The throne room was smaller than she remembered. Nolan, standing beside her in a coat 2 sizes too big, nudged her. "You sure you want this?" "No," she said, "but I'm ready for it." In the weeks that followed, Kalara restructured her council, abolished the bloodline mandates, and declared interspecies cooperation a primary directive. Nolan was named Special Advisor to the Queen, a title he claimed came with a secret snack drawer. One afternoon, while Jeff was negotiating trade tariffs with a delegation of amphibious merchants and somehow winning, Nolan found Kylara in the gardens, barefoot in the grass. "You're different," he said. "So are you," she replied. He chuckled. "I haven't made toast in a month." "You've done more than that." They stood in silence, the wind warm with rebirth. Finally, Kylara turned to him. "There's a place in the new fleet for you, if you want it." He pretended to consider it. "Will there be snacks?" "I'll authorize a snack ship. Then I accept." They walked side by side, past statues of old rulers, through arches carved with myths, and into a future neither of them had expected, but both had chosen. The transport rattled hard enough to knock Reese Calder's coffee out of its magnetic holder and onto the grimy metal floor. The cup rolled and clattered somewhere under the bench. No one moved to help. They were all too used to the sounds of shaking, groaning bolts and impending mechanical failure to bother. Besides, everyone knew Calder would drink recycled coolant before asking for help. "This ship's older than the war," muttered Private Silo, pulling her helmet tighter. "It creaks like my ex's spine," added Jenkins from the other side, earning a few tired chuckles. Reese said nothing. His eyes were locked on the display mounted above the rear hatch. Coordinates flickered across the screen, slowly zeroing in on a blinking red grid. Extraction point confirmed. The canyon where they were headed was called X-17, but the soldiers called it the Jaw. Rumor said it ate men and metal and spat out ghosts. The mission brief had been frustratingly vague. Intercept a downed Ilari vessel, secure any survivors, and assess possible intel recovery. The brass didn't even pretend to dress it up. It was a clean-up op, the kind that usually ended in silence and a body bag. The lights above blinked from red to green. The ramp dropped. Heat blasted inside, dry and acrid, with a sharp bite of scorched ozone. Reese was first out, rifle raised, boots crunching on the burnt stone. Behind him, the squad fanned out with synchronized efficiency, checking cliffs, ridges, and the skeletal remains of alien machinery. The Ilari vessel was a wreck of obsidian alloy and splintered glass, half buried in the red dust. Its hull shimmered faintly with residual energy. Standard anti-scavenger tech, harmless now. Reese approached with caution, motioning for Corporal Venn to sweep for heat signatures. The scanner beeped. 3 life forms. 2 weak, 1 stable, Venn confirmed, eyes narrowing. "That's odd. Ilari don't usually crash without exploding for dramatic effect." "Maybe they ran out of budget," Reese muttered. He left a message for command. No response came for hours. That night, while the base powered down to sleep mode, Reese returned to the observation deck. Jenkins was leaning against the wall, eating a protein bar that smelled like regret and disappointment. "She still hasn't said a word," Jenkins said through a full mouth. "I think she's trying to kill us all with awkward silence." "I've seen worse," Reese replied. "Worse than what? An intergalactic space elf with laser eyes and the personality of a cliff?" Reese watched her through the glass. "Yeah, worse." Jenkins crumpled the wrapper. "You're staring too long, sir. Starting to get the wrong idea." Reese didn't reply. The alien woman opened her eyes then, as if she'd sensed him, their gazes locked. "I think she likes you," Jenkins whispered. Reese kept his voice even. "Go find something useful to do before I reassign you to waste processor cleaning." Jenkins saluted with mock enthusiasm and left. Reese stayed. Something in those eyes made his stomach twist. Not fear, not attraction, but the haunting familiarity of someone who's seen too much and said too little for far too long. "You're not what I expected," he muttered under his breath. The lights flickered. A storm on the upper atmosphere rattled the base's shielding. He looked away. When he looked back, she was still staring at him. And maybe, just maybe, there was the slightest lift at the corner of her lips. A twitch, a flicker, almost a smile. The blackout started with a whisper. Not a dramatic explosion, not a siren, just the hum of the base's environmental systems slowing to a halt. Like a tired giant exhaling for the last time. The lights dimmed, flickered once, and died. Silence settled in the corridors. punctuated only by confused mutters and the occasional loud curse from someone who stubbed a toe against military-grade furniture. Reese stood in the corridor outside the holding cells, holding a tray with 2 cups of synth coffee and a datapad now as useful as a wet match in a vacuum. Emergency red lights kicked in, casting a low, eerie glow over everything. He stared at the door controls, now locked in manual mode. Behind the transparent barrier, Kalith didn't move. Her figure was still seated on the floor, legs folded, spine rigid. He tapped on the glass with the side of the coffee cup. "Guess what?" he said, voice loud enough to carry through the partition. "They cut power to the whole block just to keep us in suspense. I respect the drama." She didn't respond. "Of course." Reese looked down the hall. No techs, no guards. Most had probably retreated to the main barracks while they rebooted the backup systems. The silence was thicker than usual. He tapped the console out of habit, got a crackle of static and a low warning tone. Dead controls. And then, just because the universe enjoyed proving it hated him, the maglocks disengaged. The door to Kaylee's cell hissed and slid halfway open before halting. A klaxon gave a tired squawk and died. Reese stared at the opening. That shouldn't have happened. Kalith didn't move. "I'm going to go out on a limb. I've heard Terran soldiers before," she said. "Most sound like machines with skin. You try to sound human." "I'm flattered, I think." "I didn't say you succeeded." He narrowed his eyes. "You crash your ship, nearly die, get captured by the enemy, and the first thing you do is mock their sense of humor?" "It's all I have left." Reese hesitated. The edge in her voice wasn't sharp. It was hollow, a blade dulled by use, not intention. He shifted slightly, motioned toward the door. "Well, since we're bonding, how about we wait out the power failure somewhere less cell-shaped? I could kill you and leave. You could try. I'm told I'm disappointingly durable." She looked at the opening, then back at him. "Why aren't you afraid of me?" "Because you're cuffed, tired, injured, and because I've seen worse. Once had to share a drop pod with Jenkins after taco night. That was trauma." Kalith blinked once. A slow exhale left her lips. Almost a sigh of amusement. They stepped into the corridor together, the red lights throwing long shadows behind them. Somewhere in the distance, someone tripped over a power cable and cursed in 4 languages. Reese guided her toward the auxiliary common room, one of the few spots with manual overrides and actual chairs. Inside, the place was lit by a few glow sticks duct taped to the ceiling. A poker table had been overturned, and someone had left behind a half-eaten ration pack labeled Chicken-Type Flavor B. Kalith eyed the label. "Your species eats these voluntarily?" Reese shrugged. "We lost the actual chickens years ago. Now we just replicate the regret." She sat across from him. He handed her the less spilled coffee. She took it, sipped, and winced. "You were right. This is terrible." Reese smiled. "You didn't have to agree so quickly." "I've learned to identify poison." They sat in silence for a moment, the kind that felt settled, not strained. Reese glanced at her restraints. "If I remove those, are you going to decapitate me with your knees?" "Unlikely." "That's not a no." She extended her hands. He hesitated, then unclipped the dampeners. The cuffs dropped. She flexed her fingers once, watching him the entire time. He didn't flinch. "So," he said, leaning back, "want to tell me why an Alari vanguard with 3 confirmed kills on a record let herself be taken prisoner without resistance?" "I was done," she said simply. "Done fighting? Done watching people I cared about die." Reese nodded slowly. "Yeah, been there." She looked at him. "Then why are you still fighting?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I think I forgot how to stop." Kaylee's expression softened. Not quite sympathy, but the ghost of understanding. She raised her cup again. "I still hate the coffee." He lifted his in return. "To mutual suffering." They drank. The power came back on at 0430 with all the enthusiasm of a reluctant bureaucrat. Lights blinked to life, one section at a time. Systems rebooted. Consoles chirped indignantly at having been ignored. Somewhere in the engineering wing, someone cheered, followed immediately by a loud bang and a shout about reverse polarity and "Not again, you idiot!" Reese was still in the common room, now awkwardly illuminated by full overhead lights. He squinted against the brightness and looked across the table. Caleth had fallen asleep sometime around hour 3, head tilted back against the wall, mouth barely open. Her posture was too perfect even in unconsciousness, as if her spine had been designed by a military architect. He considered waking her, then he didn't. Instead, he quietly retrieved the empty coffee cups, tossed the remains of the ration bar into the recycler, and checked the wall screen. Still locked out of external comms. They were technically back online, but the command uplink hadn't reestablished. Either that or someone upstairs didn't want to talk. Neither would have surprised him. Caleth stirred, one eye opened. "You stayed." "I considered leaving, but I figured if you woke up alone, you'd assume I abandoned you and ripped someone's arms off." "That's fair. Also, you snore." Her brow furrowed. "I do not. Like a malfunctioning plasma engine." A moment of silence. Then with the smallest twitch of a corner lip, almost imperceptible, she replied, "I hope it haunts you." He grinned. "Already does." The door opened. Jenkins entered, his hair sticking up on one side, uniform rumpled like he'd slept in the laundry chute. "Well, this is cozy," he said, glancing between them. "Should I come back later, or should I make popcorn?" Caleth arched an eyebrow. Reese gave him a flat look. "Report. Command link's still down. Systems are up, but half the sensors are glitching. Medbay says the other 2 Elari are stable but unconscious. Also, Ven sat on the portable scanner, and now it keeps broadcasting his heartbeat on every channel." Caleth tilted her head. "Your base is efficient." "It's got character," Reese muttered. "And chronic dysfunction," Jenkins added. Reese stood. "I want a full scan of the wreck site before another scavenger crew gets there. We missed something. Something's not adding up." Caleth stood as well. "You're assuming the crash wasn't an accident." "I'm assuming you don't do anything by accident." Jenkins whistled softly. "Careful, sir." That sounded almost like admiration. Reese ignored him and headed for the exit. Caleth followed without being told. Jenkins trailed behind, muttering something about needing hazard pay. The vehicle bay was half frozen from the night cycle. Reese climbed into the lead scout transport, an old atmospheric rover nicknamed the Brick for both its shape and maneuverability. Jenkins grumbled as he climbed in the back. Caleth sat in the passenger seat, buckling herself in with the precise grace of someone who had survived many vehicles with worse odds. The ride across the canyon basin was bumpy, filled with static interference from the planet's unstable magnetic field. Reese drove one-handed, checking the holo map with the other. He glanced at Caleth. "You sure you want to see the crash site again?" "I don't avoid pain. I evaluate it." That's the most emotionally repressed way I've ever heard someone say yes. "I learn from the best." Jenkins leaned forward. "Are you flirting? Is this what interspecies tension sounds like?" Reese didn't answer. Caleth said, "If I were flirting, you would know." The silence after that was impressively thick. They reached the wreckage just after local dawn. The sun here was a dull bronze disk, filtering light through chemical haze. The Alari ship hadn't changed, still cracked open like a ruptured beetle, parts of it fused with the surrounding rock. Reese approached first, scanning with a rebuilt handheld rig. Ven's scanner's still broadcasting his heartbeat, by the way. He's either jogging in circles or extremely nervous. Caleth moved toward the ship's core. This section housed the memory core. It should have survived impact. Jenkins kicked at a piece of debris. "Should have?" Caleth ignored him. She touched a panel, her fingers glowing faintly, and a recessed compartment hissed open. Inside was a crystal sphere, fractured and blackened. She pulled it free with careful hands. This held the flight data and communications. Reese stepped closer. "Can it be read?" "Not in this state. We've got a lab." She was already walking back toward the transport. Back at base, the crystal was placed into an interface array. Sparks jumped along its surface. Then a series of fractured images flashed across the screen. An Alari fleet in retreat, coded signals in Alari script, a distant explosion. Caleth's voice was calm. "This isn't a mission record. It's a message, a warning." Reese leaned in. "From who?" She paused. "Me." Past you, future me, or a version of me that didn't survive. Jenkins blinked. Okay, new rule. If someone brings a time message from their alternate self, they should start with that. Calith's expression remained unreadable. This message was embedded in the nav core by override code. I only know one person with access to that code. Reese waited. My sister. Jenkins leaned back. Great. There's two of you. She was on a classified assignment, deep infiltration behind Terran lines. If she sent this, something is coming. Reese crossed his arms. Something worse than war? Something that ends war by making it irrelevant. Jenkins tried to lighten the mood. Like universal dance parties? Calith didn't smile. Reese didn't either. Jenkins stood in the corridor holding a breakfast burrito and staring at the flashing red text on the console. He squinted, took a bite, and chewed slowly, as though somehow that would make the data less terrifying. Hey, Reese, he called without taking his eyes off the screen. Do you remember how I said I wanted something interesting to happen today? Reese appeared in the doorway, half dressed in a field uniform, still drying his hair with a rag. Number, but go on. I regret it, deeply, passionately, with all the fire of 1,000 exploding moons. Reese walked over and looked at the screen. The text was alien, literally pulsing with an encryption pattern that pulsed like a heartbeat. Calith stood behind them, arms folded, eyes narrowed. She didn't speak for a long time. That's her code, she said. My sister's. But it's not just a message. It's a beacon. Reese scratched his chin. You mean someone's calling her? Number someone's calling what she found. Jenkins swallowed the last of the burrito. Please tell me it's not an ancient doom machine, because we've had 2 of those this year, and they always end with me in the med bay with a broken limb and emotional trauma. Calith moved closer to the terminal. She wouldn't send this unless she was compromised, or dead. Reese crossed his arms. What exactly was her mission? Tracking a weapon of origin unknown designation, one that didn't follow known physics. Jenkins held up a hand. Wait, are we talking singularity level? Quantum collapse? Planet eater? Emotion harvester? We have a whole betting pool in engineering. She called it the breath engine. Reese blinked. That sounds poetic. She wasn't. They ran the signal through the translation matrix, and for a few minutes, the room filled with the low whine of decrypting pulses and the occasional curse from the system AI, which had developed sarcasm after too many reboots. Jenkins tapped his earpiece. We've got atmospheric anomalies. Local cloud density just tripled, and the magnetosphere is twitching like it owes someone money. Calith said nothing. Her eyes were locked on the screen as the final lines of code resolved into coordinates. Coordinates deep within the contested zone between Terran and Ilari territory. Reese leaned in. That's a war graveyard. Everything that goes in there gets shredded by autonomous drones. Why would your sister send you there? Calith turned toward him. Because it's hidden in plain sight. If you want to bury a god, you do it where only the dead go. Jenkins muttered, You people need better metaphors. An hour later, Reese stood beside the launch pad while Jenkins loaded the last of the mission packs. Calith adjusted the calibrations on her new field suit, a hybrid of Terran armor and Ilari tech. Reese tried not to stare at the glowing nodes along her spine interface. Jenkins slapped the side of the ship. I made some modifications to the nav systems, so if we crash again, at least we'll do it with better playlists. Reese climbed aboard. What's on them? Jenkins grinned. Mostly dramatic orchestra stuff, a little Terran pop, and one recording of Calith saying, You're all going to die on a loop. Calith blinked. I never said that. I edited it together from 5 different things you did say. It's very convincing. The ship launched smoothly. Reese piloted while Calith took the co-pilot seat, navigating with a precision that Reese found both admirable and mildly threatening. The war zone loomed ahead, a massive stretch of space littered with dead satellites, broken ships, and roving AI defense units with abandonment issues. Jenkins, seated behind them, hummed cheerfully. You know, if we die in here, at least we'll be remembered as incredibly dumb. Calith answered without looking back. I don't intend to die. Me neither. I've got a date with someone who thinks I'm taller than I actually am. They slipped past the first drone cluster using a stealth pulse that Calith generated manually. The AI units drifted past them like wolves distracted by a decoy scent. Reese exhaled. That actually worked. Remind me to stop underestimating you. Calith glanced at him. I prefer it when people do. They reached the coordinates without incident, which was disturbing in itself. The space around the location was unnaturally quiet, like the eye of a storm that had forgotten it was supposed to move. The breath engine wasn't a machine in the traditional sense. It was a sphere the size of a dropship, made of overlapping geometries that defied visual focus. Reese stared at it through the viewport and immediately felt like his brain had tried to exit his skull through his ears. Jenkins looked pale. Okay, south, we found it. Now what? Calith opened a channel, her voice steady. If she left the key, it will be in the signal tethered to the engine's core. We have to interface directly. Reese frowned. Define interface. Mentally. Jenkins raised a hand again. Okay, I vote no. Anyone else? No? Okay, I'll just prepare the sedatives now. Calith placed a hand against the control sphere inside the cockpit. The console shimmered, reshaped itself into a spiraling glyph that pulsed with an organic rhythm. She closed her eyes. Reese grabbed her shoulder. Are you sure about this? She didn't open her eyes. Number. But that's never stopped me. She connected. The ship trembled. Outside, the breath engine stirred. Calith didn't speak for 8 whole minutes after she disengaged from the interface. Reese had counted, mostly to distract himself from the low thrum now vibrating through the hull. The breath engine hovered silently outside the ship, not moving, not pulsing, just watching. If a weapon could watch, if a geometry-defying anomaly of impossible origin could judge you silently for your fashion choices and life mistakes. Jenkins broke the silence. So, we all heard the voice, right? The one that said, I have awakened and I hunger for purpose? That wasn't just in my head, Calith exhaled. It's alive. Cool. Definitely not terrifying. Reese kept his eyes on her. Did your sister leave a message? Calith nodded slowly. She left herself. Jenkins blinked. I feel like I should ask what you mean by that, but I'm not going to like the answer. She uploaded her consciousness into the engine's threshold layer to stop it from fully activating. It recognized her mind as compatible and decided she was acceptable company. So it paused. It has been paused for 6 cycles. Reese stared. Your sister is babysitting a reality-warping god machine. She said it was bored. That's why it started reaching out again. Jenkins gave a strangled laugh. Right. Sure. Just a cosmic entity craving social interaction. Next, it'll want a blog and a vintage coffee subscription. Calith touched the side of the interface again. It asked me a question. It asked what we are worth. Reese stepped closer. And? I told it. We are unfinished. That we are flawed. That we destroy because we don't know what else to do. But that some of us are trying. That we have potential. Jenkins muttered, Wow. Really going with the space therapy approach. Calith glanced at Reese. It accepted that answer. It is going back to sleep. But only for a time. It said the next answer must be better. Reese rubbed his face. So we've just put a galactic apocalypse on a snooze button. For now. They watched the breath engine fold in on itself, collapsing through space without a ripple. Like reality gave it a polite nod and stepped aside. Jenkins made a note in his datapad. Do not disturb until humanity matures emotionally. On the return flight, silence didn't feel so heavy. Calith sat beside Reese, her eyes closed, not from exhaustion, but from peace, however temporary. Reese leaned back in the pilot's seat. You know, he said, if you ever want to lie to command about what just happened, I'd be fine with that. Something like, oh, the anomaly was a big balloon full of angry bees. We bravely popped it. Very heroic, Calith opened one eye. They would never believe you were heroic. That hurts, but it's also fair. Jenkins chimed in from the back. I'm just writing, routine recovery mission, no existential crises, minor lunch mishap. That should pass inspection. On the return flight, silence didn't feel so heavy. Kayla sat beside Reese, her eyes closed, not from exhaustion, but from peace, however temporary. Reese leaned back in the pilot's seat. You know, he said, if you ever want to lie to command about what just happened, I'd be fine with that. Something like, oh, the anomaly was a big balloon full of angry bees. We bravely popped it. Very heroic. Kaleth opened one eye. They would never believe you were heroic. That hurts, but it's also fair. Jenkins chimed in from the back. I'm just writing routine recovery mission, no existential crises, minor lunch mishap. That should pass inspection. When they landed back at the base, the atmosphere was warmer, not just from the weather, which had apparently stopped trying to kill them, but from the people. The engineers clapped when Jenkins returned, mostly because they assumed he hadn't survived. Reese was met with a rare handshake from the head medic and a coffee with extra sugar from a technician who still owed him a favor. Kaleth walked the perimeter of the base once, alone. Then she found Reese leaning against a cargo crate, looking out at the horizon, arms crossed like he was afraid it might get ideas again. You didn't run, she said. I was busy. Also, the ship's keys were missing. She stepped closer. When I first met you, I thought you were another weapon, a sharp thing built to be pointed at enemies. He smiled. Still might be. But now I see a man who watches before he strikes, who questions, who hopes. That sounds suspiciously like a compliment. I'm still calibrating. He turned to face her. What will you do now? There are others like the engine, not as powerful, but dangerous. I need to find them before someone else does. You always talk like you're already leaving. I always expect to be. Well, he said after a long pause, I've got nothing better to do. I hear chasing rogue alien tech is great for cardio. She smiled, not wide, not bright, but real, the first time he'd seen it. Jenkins passed by carrying a crate labeled, definitely not explosives, and muttered, if you two start kissing, I swear I'll eject myself into space. Reese ignored him. So, partners? Kaleth extended her hand. He took it. The grip was firm. Warm. Behind them, the stars turned quietly in their endless math. Somewhere deep in that silence, the breath engine waited, dreaming strange dreams of broken people who were trying to fix themselves. And for now, that was enough. The summit chamber pulsed with sterile light, the kind that made even titanium walls look tired. Ambient energy shimmered through the transparent ceiling dome, where a planet's rings, thick and molten gold, rotated in slow elegance above the station. A silence, the kind that only followed interspecies legalese, hung heavy in the room. The delegations had gathered, Illyrians, their blue-toned skin luminous under the overhead glow. The Trinsari, who always looked like they'd rather be elsewhere, preferably detonating something. The crystalline old Tor, floating serenely in humming tunes no one could quite identify. And the humans, of course, represented by a diplomatic attaché in a suit too clean to be trustworthy, and a soldier standing behind him chewing synthetic gum with the tenacity of a maintenance bot scrubbing rust. Sergeant Leo Maris shifted his weight, watching the alien representatives fidget with ceremonial scepters, digital translator bands, and political egos. He wasn't supposed to be here, technically. He'd missed his shuttle back to Earth Fleet Command because of a broken vending unit and a questionable bowl of station ramen. Now he was background noise, a lump in a too-tight uniform that still bore scorch marks from a previous skirmish, loitering behind diplomats who'd studied for years how to insult someone in 6 languages without moving their eyebrows. Opposite him, General Thera of Illyria stood perfectly still. Her armor glinted with geometric ridges, like it had been grown rather than forged. Her long ears twitched once, the only betrayal of motion. Eyes bright gold, jaw set like a planet's orbit. Leo didn't know much about Illyrian culture, but he did know she could probably throw him through a wall and file it under diplomatic misunderstanding. A small sound interrupted the stillness, soft at first like a pressurized valve leaking, then louder, wavering, organic. The Illyrian baby strapped to General Thera's side, barely visible under a wrap of silken fabric and hardened plating, began to cry. It wasn't a normal cry. It vibrated. It resonated. The Trinsari diplomat clutched his earports. The Yildtor glowed violet in discomfort. One of the human aides backed into a hover table and knocked over a bowl of nutrient cubes. Thera remained motionless, except for a tiny flick of her long ear. The cry grew louder. The translator drones buzzed in confusion, catching syllables that didn't exist in any dictionary. The baby let out another wail. This one pitched so high the station's lights dimmed for a second. A silence followed as if reality itself paused to catch its breath. Leo blinked. Then without thinking, or perhaps in a way only a man terminally undercaffeinated could, he stepped forward. "I'm good with babies," he said. It was not the sentence expected in a hall filled with delegates who could vaporize a tank by frowning too hard. Heads turned, ears twitched. One of the Wildtor let out a melodic sound that might have been shock or laughter. The human diplomat's mouth opened in slow horror. Thera stared at Leo like someone who had just been handed a loaf of bread in the middle of a gunfight. "Permission to assist," Leo added, already approaching the baby, who was now thrashing tiny limbs in righteous fury. "Denied," Thyra said. Leo ignored her, not out of disrespect, though she would assume so, but because he had spotted the problem. The baby's wrap had slipped, a thermal pad had detached, and Illyrians he'd heard were thermo-reactive in infancy. "Hey, little Starstorm," he murmured, easing the baby into his arms like he was defusing a proximity mine. "I got you. Warm and steady." The baby gurgled, then hiccuped, then let out a wet sigh and collapsed against his chest like an alien octopus that had decided maybe the universe wasn't so bad after all. Everyone stared. Leo looked up. "She's fine, bit warm, might need to burp, or a treaty renegotiation." The silence continued. A Trinsari aide dropped his ceremonial blade. It clattered loudly. General Thera stepped forward, slowly. The kind of slow that made Leo rethink every life choice since boot camp. "You touched my daughter," she said, voice low and measured. "She touched me first," Leo said. "Metaphorically. Also literally just now on my uniform. I think she spat up something that glows." "She is of Illyrian blood," Thera said. "And I'm O-negative. We're all weird inside." The baby let out a contented sigh. Her fingers curled around the edge of Leo's badge, tugging once with soft insistence. His grip softened, gaze flicking down as something small and tender twisted in his chest. "I've handled plasma cores hotter than this," he muttered, "and none of them drooled." "Return her," Thyra said, though there was a pause, brief but real, between her words. Leo handed her over with exaggerated care, like passing a sacred artifact, which, given Illyrian views on progeny, wasn't too far off. "She's strong," he said. "You're lucky." Thera held the baby to her shoulder. The child nuzzled in, finally asleep. For the first time since the summit began, the room was utterly still. The silence was not tense now. It was heavy, contemplative, charged in a way that had nothing to do with politics or treaties. Then Leo turned to the human diplomat. "So are we writing Baby Whisperer into the treaty? Or should I draft a clause?" The human blinked. You handled, do you have children?" "God, no," Leo said. "I have a cactus. It died." There was a stifled laugh from somewhere among the delegates. A Trinsari delegate snorted. One of the crystal-bodied Iltor shimmered gently in pink, a sign of amusement. The human attaché cleared his throat. "Perhaps we might take a short recess?" "Good idea," Leo said. "I think she likes jazz. I'll hum something from the late 20th century and see if it calms galactic tensions." Thera looked at him, not with anger, not even confusion, but something else. Curiosity, maybe, or disbelief. Her eyes lingered longer than necessary. Then, without a word, she turned and strode from the room. Leo stood alone, feeling oddly like he'd just diffused a warhead using only humor, baby wipes, and mild sarcasm. He patted the spot on his uniform where the baby had drooled. "Well," he muttered, "first contact, huh?" By the third cycle after the baby incident, Sergeant Leo Maris had become an unofficial tourist attraction. Delegates passed him in the corridor with widened eyes and whispered half phrases like, The human with the baby, or the one who didn't die. He started timing how long it took people to glance at him and then pretend they weren't. The record was 2 seconds, held by a Trinsari war priest who, in fairness, had 3 eyelids and limited peripheral vision. Leo tried to resume his usual station duties, which consisted mostly of standing in places and pretending to know what was going on. But somehow, ever since he'd cradled a howling Illyrian infant into serenity, he found himself reassigned, politely and mysteriously, to temporary liaison duty. He suspected someone high up had the sense of humor of a drunken AI. He didn't mind. The food was better, and no one made him do inventory. That morning, as he was scraping the last of his breakfast ration, synthetic eggs with a consistency somewhere between sponge and regret, his comm badge chirped. It was the voice of Commander Naval, dry and clipped, like she was constantly chewing on disappointment. "You're being reassigned. Effective immediately." "Reassigned," Leo repeated, already regretting not pretending he'd lost the comm. "Yes, escort duty. You'll accompany General Thera on her investigative review of Tarsus 9's internal security records." "I see. And the part where I'm entirely unqualified for that role?" "Classified." "I thought you might say that. Also, bring a towel." "Should I be worried?" "Extremely." He found Thera waiting at docking bay 12. She stood alone, armor seamless, her long ears angled back like antennae tuned to a station he couldn't hear. The baby was nowhere in sight, which mildly disappointed Leo. He had actually practiced a lullaby involving space whales and something called a plunkfish. "You," she said. "Good morning," he replied cheerfully. "Still haven't killed me. I take that as progress." "We are investigating a potential security breach. Your presence was recommended." "Recommended, right. By whom?" She paused. "Your baby handling skills were noted." "I'm never living that down, am I?" "No." They boarded a maintenance transport with exposed wiring and a navigation system that coughed when booted. It drifted through the station's lower levels, areas not meant for diplomatic boots or polished uniforms. The walls were scarred with years of repurposing, the kind of place where things got lost, forgotten, or deliberately misplaced. As they passed through a decompression tunnel, Thera turned her head slightly. "My daughter remembers you." Leo blinked. "Is that good?" "She attempted to mimic your vocal pitch this morning." "So, yelling?" "She called the station's waste disposal system a metal butt with asthma." Leo grinned. "That does sound like me." "You should feel honored. Illyrian infants rarely attempt mimicry outside their lineage." "Well," he said, puffing his chest, "I've been told I'm like a virus. I get into places I shouldn't." Their ride jolted to a stop. The doors creaked open into subsection 8R, a zone officially designated for environmental regulation, unofficially known among station techs as where complaints go to die. The lighting flickered and a faint buzzing echoed through the ducts. "We had a sensor anomaly here," Thyara said, consulting a wrist node. "Motion detected during restricted hours. No clearance logs, no visual data." Leo squinted. "Sabotage? Possibly, or a technical glitch. But given recent summit tensions? Great. Nothing like the smell of paranoia in the morning." They moved slowly through the corridor. Thyra took point, scanning with an Illyrian handheld detector shaped like a seashell, and probably worth more than Leo's annual salary. He followed with a hand resting near his sidearm, although if things went bad, he suspected Thyra's armor alone could do more damage than his entire arsenal. They found the breach point in a storage alcove. The security node had been tampered with, not disabled, but subtly reprogrammed to loop visual feeds. Whoever did it knew their way around Illyrian and human tech, which made Leo's stomach tighten. "You recognize this?" she asked. "Yeah. I dated someone who hacked a fleet commander's birthday alarm once. This feels like her style." Thera gave him a long, unreadable look. "I don't recommend dating her," he added. "She had 6 drones and a knife collection she named after emotions." As they turned back, a sudden thud echoed down the passage. Then another, heavy, repeating. Leo tensed, hand drawing toward his sidearm. "Something's coming." "Not something," Thyra said. "Someone." From the far end, a figure emerged, a security bot, dented and flickering, stumbling like it had just discovered legs. Its I-beam sputtered, locking briefly on them before skipping to the ceiling. Then it let out a series of distressed beeps. "Did it just swear at us?" Leo asked. "It's broadcasting a distress loop in obsolete Illyrian dialect." The bot collapsed with a wheeze. Leo knelt and accessed its diagnostics. It tried to purge its memory but failed halfway through. "Look, there's a partial image fragment. Someone walked past it, cloaked. Human outline, heat signature masked." "Impossible," Thyra said. "Human cloaking is rudimentary. Unless someone stole Illyrian tech, or had help." She went quiet. Too quiet. Leo stood. "All right, let's say someone is sabotaging the summit. Why? To disrupt negotiations? Or to provoke war?" she said. He nodded slowly. "And we're the odd couple investigating it. One with advanced weaponry and discipline. And me?" They made their way back in silence, broken only by Leo muttering sarcastic mission names under his breath. "Operation Baby Monitor, Diplomacy and Diapers, the General and the Doofus." Back at the upper decks as they neared the diplomatic wing, Thera paused. "My daughter, she reacts differently when you're near." "Differently how? Like smile differently or explode a vase with her mind differently?" "The first," she said. "Mostly." Leo tilted his head. "So, I'm either a calming influence or a future intergalactic babysitter." "You may be both," he exhaled. "I'd better start carrying snacks." As she turned to leave, she paused. Then uncharacteristically, she said, "Thank you." "For not dropping the baby?" he asked. "For making her laugh." Leo watched her disappear down the corridor, wondering how he'd gone from an afterthought in combat boots to the only human a blue-skinned warrior trusted with her most precious secret. He scratched his head. "Well," he muttered, "guess I'll have to upgrade from cactus to actual childcare manual." By the time the summit reached its final day, tensions inside the diplomatic chamber were so thick, Leo swore even the station's recycled air had turned judgmental. Delegates from 28 systems sat in what might generously be described as polite silence, though most were probably strategizing how best to vaporize the others without getting blamed. The translation drones buzzed anxiously. The Illyrian baby, who had miraculously learned how to crawl during the night, was attempting to wedge herself under a conference table. Leo, seated precisely nowhere official, was trying very hard not to panic. He had not slept, he had not showered, and he was pretty sure the nanite in his coffee had grown sentient and wanted voting rights. But more importantly, he had a working theory, one that connected the cloaked figure, the sabotage, and the absurdly aggressive diplomatic coffee machine. The latter, it turned out, had been reprogrammed to serve scalding liquid only during moments of negotiation strain. One Trivarch ambassador had nearly lost his lower jaw. Across the chamber, General Thera met his eyes, subtly tilting her head. It was a signal. He still wasn't sure what kind of signal. Maybe be ready or, "You will probably die in 5 minutes." But he stood up anyway. No one noticed, which suited him fine. The plan was simple. Lure the saboteur, expose them publicly, and prevent interstellar war, which was ambitious considering Leo's most complicated accomplishment to date had been sneaking snacks into his old unit's barracks. He made his way toward the control deck, past security officers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, and one particularly nervous janitorial bot polishing the same tile for the 3rd hour. At the systems console, he pretended to check communications logs while discreetly activating a scanner Thera had given him. At first, nothing. Then, a blip. A faint energy signature moving beneath the floor panels. "Got you," he whispered, tapping his comm. "Thyra, movement near central conduit C. Looks like they're headed for the power junction." "Intercept. I'm rerouting security." "Copy. Please remember I'm still fragile and flammable." He sprinted down the corridor, nearly colliding with a delegation of Grunians who shouted something about soft-legged mammals before returning to their argument over orbital shrimp taxation. At Junction C, he dropped into a crawl space and came face to face with a shimmer in the air. Something not quite visible, like heat haze. "I know you're there," he said. "Look, if you're trying to stop the summit, I get it. Bureaucracy makes me want to chew a plasma grenade too. But this isn't the way." The shimmer shifted, and a figure emerged. not fully human, not fully Illyrian. A hybrid, features blended like two dialects spoken at once. Eyes bright with anger, skin bearing the faintest violet hue. The cloaking field flickered and died. "You shouldn't be here," they hissed. "Yeah, people keep telling me that. They won't listen. They never do. All this talk of unity. It's a lie." Leo kept his voice level. "You think blowing up the summit's going to fix that? Make them listen harder? Because I promise you, it'll just give them another excuse to retreat behind guns and steel walls. They fear what they don't understand. I was born proof of that. And yet, you're here. You came anyway." The figure hesitated, and for one breath, Leo thought he might be reaching them. Then the bomb's primer flashed red in their hand. He lunged. The scuffle was fast, messy, and loud. Leo managed to grab the detonator, but the attacker landed a blow square to his ribs, knocking the air out of him. Pain sang through his chest like a badly tuned opera. But he held on. Feet scrambled, elbows flew. Then, as suddenly as it started, Thera appeared behind them, a stun lance raised. One quiet zap later, the attacker crumpled. Leo sat there wheezing like a broken accordion. Thera offered him a hand. "You always dive toward explosives?" "I like to keep my hobbies exciting." She examined the device. "Powerful, improvised, barely stable. I feel personally insulted." The saboteur was taken into custody quietly, escorted by a small fleet of heavily armed diplomats who were pretending not to be thrilled at the drama. Leo and Thera returned to the summit chamber just in time for the final vote. One by one, the delegates stood and cast their decisions: war or alliance, divide or unite. It came down to the Illyrian Council, whose matriarch leaned toward the microphone and said simply, "Let us raise our children without fear." The room exhaled. Afterward, Leo found himself leaning against a support column, trying not to fall asleep upright. Thera approached, carrying something bundled in a soft stasis blanket. "She refused to nap until she saw you," she said. Leo took the baby automatically. She gurgled and immediately tried to eat his comm badge. "Is this how political alliances are sealed now?" "Among Illyrians," Thera said, "parental approval weighs heavily." Leo looked down at the tiny creature in his arms. "You're not going to remember any of this, are you?" The baby sneezed. "Possibly in agreement." Thera studied him. "You did more than survive. You changed something." He gave her a tired smile. "I used to think my job was just not screwing up. Now I think maybe I can do more." She extended her arm. He clasped it. "You're not just a soldier anymore," she said. He tilted his head. "What am I then?" "You are very good with babies." They both laughed. As the summit concluded and the delegates dispersed to their shuttles, a quiet shift seemed to settle over the station. Nothing overt, just a sense that something small and improbable had been accomplished. Leo watched the stars as they crawled slowly across the observation window. He'd faced war, sabotage, a baby with excellent lung capacity, and come out not just alive, but part of something larger than himself. He cradled the infant one last time, gently returning her to her mother. "Take care of her," he said. "We will," Thera replied. He turned to leave, then paused. "Hey," he said, "if she ever needs a babysitter, I still work cheap."